The Nexus Combat Championships represented everything the galaxy did best. Excessive bureaucracy, wrapped around sanctioned violence, all while pretending it was about honor and cultural exchange. For 3,000 years, the tournament had run with the precision of a neutron star's rotation, each cycle bringing together the galaxy's most formidable species to beat the living daylights out of each other in spectacular fashion. The registration process alone required 17 different forms, each translated into 437 languages, plus whatever passed for communication among the crystalline Fazari, who apparently conveyed meaning through harmonic resonance and aggressive posturing. Getting approved meant navigating a diplomatic maze that would make a Kafkaesque nightmare look like a children's board game. This year's roster read like a who's who of evolutionary overkill. The Vorthak had evolved on a death world where gravity could crush diamonds, developing bone density that made depleted uranium look squishy. Their champion stood 8 feet tall and probably weighed more than a small shuttle. The Zenari brought their traditional approach. 4 arms, each ending in razor-sharp claws that could slice through starship hull plating, plus an attitude that suggested they viewed everything smaller than a dreadnought as potential prey. Then there were the Threxians, who'd perfected the art of looking like walking nightmares. 6 legs, articulated spines that could extend their reach by 3 feet in any direction, and mandibles that evolution had apparently designed specifically for intimidation. Their combat philosophy centered around the belief that if your opponent wasn't screaming in terror, you weren't trying hard enough. The tournament organizers had seen it all, catalogued it all, and developed betting pools around it all. They knew exactly how much punishment each species could dish out and absorb. The predictive algorithms could calculate fight outcomes within a 2.3% margin of error, making the whole spectacle as choreographed as a ballet, albeit one where the dancers occasionally exploded, which made the current situation so delightfully unprecedented. Arena 7's preparation chamber sat empty, but its atmospheric processes hummed along, maintaining a nitrogen-oxygen mix that seemed almost quaint compared to the methane-sulfur cocktails or high-pressure xenon environments required by other competitors. More puzzling was the flag hanging from the chamber's ceremonial mount, a simple design featuring alternating red and white stripes with a blue canton containing white stars. Earth, read the registration database, when anyone bothered to look it up. Species, human. No diplomatic credentials on file. No previous tournament participation. No cultural exchange agreements. No ambassadorial contacts. No nothing. Except somehow, impossibly, a completed registration form that had appeared in the system 3 weeks ago. The tournament's chief administrator, a 4-eyed Gellian whose species had evolved excellent depth perception specifically for tracking bureaucratic and inconsistencies, found herself staring at her screens with the expression of someone who'd discovered their carefully organized universe had developed a glitch. Impossible, she muttered, cycling through her security protocols for the 15th time. The registration appeared legitimate, bearing all the correct authorization codes and diplomatic seals. Yet none of the galactic databases contained any reference to this Earth or its inhabitant. Her assistant, a nervous Pixari whose ancestors had evolved anxiety as a survival mechanism on a planet where everything was trying to eat them, offered a tentative suggestion. Perhaps it's a clerical error, a mistranslation of an existing competitor's homeworld. Then explain the atmospheric requirements. The administrator shot back, gesturing at the environmental readings from Arena 7. 21% oxygen. 78% nitrogen, trace gases, standard pressure. That's not a mistake, it's a very specific life support configuration. The readings were, frankly, boring. No exotic chemistry, no unusual gravitational requirements, no electromagnetic field specifications that would indicate a species adapted to high radiation environments. Whatever these humans were, they came from a remarkably mundane world. Should we contact the diplomatic corps? The assistant asked, his voice carrying that particular tremor that indicated he'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. Already tried. They're as baffled as we are. The administrator leaned back in her chair, all 4 eyes focused on the mysterious registration. 23 species registered this cycle, all with proper documentation going back centuries. Then this Earth entry appears out of nowhere, complete with all the correct authorization code. The betting pools had gone haywire. Bookmakers across the galaxy were offering astronomical odds against the unknown competitor, mostly because they had absolutely no baseline data for calculating actual probability. A few daredevils had placed token bets on the mystery species, figuring that if the universe was feeling particularly ironic, they might as well profit from it. Meanwhile, the other competitors had begun arriving at their preparation chambers, each bringing enough equipment and support staff to outfit a small military expedition. The Vorthak delegation included 17 combat specialists, 12 medical technicians, and what appeared to be a mobile forge for maintaining their warriors' ceremonial weapons. The Zinari had arrived with an entourage that resembled a traveling embassy, complete with cultural attachés, whose job seemed to involve making their champion feel properly homicidal before each match. Arena 7 remained empty, its mysterious flag the only indication that someone, somewhere, intended to show up and participate in the galaxy's most prestigious combat tournament. The administrator turned to her assistant with the weary expression of someone whose orderly universe had developed a sense of humor. Double-check the arena's atmospheric settings, and prepare for the possibility that we're about to host the galaxy's most expensive no-show. The crash landing hadn't been spectacular by galactic standards. No massive explosions, no devastating impact crater, just a smoking heap of what had once been a respectable exploration vessel now decorating the tournament planet's secondary spaceport like abstract art. The pilot emerged from the wreckage with the casual demeanor of someone who'd just parallel parked in a tight spot rather than survived atmospheric re-entry in a ship held together by emergency sealant and pure stubbornness. Finding herself stranded on Nexus Prime had initially seemed like the universe's idea of a practical joke. The nearest repair facility quoted her a price that would have made a Ferengi weep with joy, and the waiting list for replacement parts stretched longer than some species' evolutionary timeline. Then she'd noticed the crowds, the betting booths, and the general atmosphere of barely contained violence that suggested either a revolution or really good entertainment. Combat tournament, explained the helpful Daxarian information broker, his tentacles writhing with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found a new customer. Biggest prize pool in the galaxy. Winners take home enough credits to buy their own moon, assuming they survive the victory celebration. The prize money alone would cover ship repairs and leave enough left over to upgrade to something that wouldn't try to kill her every time she engaged the hyperdrive. More appealing was the timeline. The tournament ran for exactly 1 week, which coincided perfectly with how long the repair estimates suggested she'd be stranded anyway. Registration requirements, she asked, already mentally cataloging her emergency supply. The broker's expression shifted to what might have been sympathy, if his species had evolved facial muscles capable of conveying complex emotion. Oh, you'd need diplomatic credentials, cultural exchange agreements, species authorization from the Galactic Council, medical clearances, combat certifications, psychological evaluations, and approximately 17 forms of bureaucratic approval that take months to process. She nodded thoughtfully, then pulled out her datapad and began typing with the focused intensity of someone who'd spent years dealing with bureaucratic systems designed by committees of sadists. 20 minutes later, she'd submitted her registration through what appeared to be a clerical loophole so obscure that the system's security protocols hadn't even recognized it existed. While other species arrived with entire support crews, she made do with what she had: a basic medkit, emergency rations that could probably survive direct hits from antimatter weapons, and a toolkit designed for spacecraft maintenance that doubled as improvised weaponry with the right attitude. Her preparation ritual consisted of checking her equipment, doing some stretches, and wondering if the tournament medical insurance covered stupid decisions. The contrast was delicious. The Vorthak champion spent 6 hours daily in meditation chambers designed to channel his species' ancestral rage into combat effectiveness. The Zinari performed elaborate ritual combat dances that had been perfected over millennia, each movement calculated to optimize their natural killing instincts. The Threxians engaged in ceremonial bloodletting that served both as psychological preparation and as a warning to potential opponents. Meanwhile, the human competitor sat in Arena 7's preparation chamber, eating a protein bar and reading the tournament regulations with the methodical attention of someone looking for creative interpretations of the rules. The administrator's attempts to research Earth's combat capabilities had produced results that ranged from non-existent to actively contradict. The few references she'd found suggested a species that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel and showed no evidence of the specialized evolutionary adaptations that typically produced successful tournament competitors. No natural weapons, she reported to her increasingly agitated supervisor, a 8-legged Krellian, whose species had evolved perfect organizational skills alongside a complete inability to handle unexpected situations. No enhanced bone density, no redundant organs, no specialized combat adaptations. Their homeworld isn't even particularly dangerous. Standard gravity, temperate climate, abundant resources. Then how did they get approved for the tournament? The supervisor demanded, his chalice clicking in agitation. Unknown. The authorization codes check out, but I can't trace their origin. It's as if they appeared in our system from nowhere. The other competitors had begun taking notice of the mystery addition to their rank. The Vorthak delegation sent a scout to observe the humans' preparation routine, who returned with a report that essentially amounted to confused shrugging. The Xenari combat specialists analyzed available footage and concluded that either the human was employing some form of advanced psychological warfare, or genuinely had no idea what she was doing. She spends most of her time reading, reported the Xenari observer, his forearms gesticulating in bewilderment. Not combat manuals or strategic analyses, the actual tournament regulations, page by page, like she's studying for an examination. The betting pools had shifted from astronomical odds to complete chaos. Some bookmakers had stopped taking bets entirely, claiming force majeure due to insufficient data. Others had embraced the uncertainty, offering side bets on everything from how long the human would survive to whether she'd even show up for her first match. The human in question seemed remarkably unconcerned about any of this. She'd established a routine that involved equipment maintenance, physical conditioning that looked disturbingly casual compared to other species' elaborate training regimens, and what appeared to be strategic planning sessions conducted entirely in her head while staring at the ceiling. When approached by tournament media for the traditional pre-competition interviews, she provided answers that somehow managed to be both completely honest and utterly uninformative. Yes, she was looking forward to the competition. No, she didn't have any specific training in combat sport. Yes, she understood the risks involved. No, she couldn't comment on her species' traditional fighting technique. The interviews left the media representatives with the distinct impression that they'd just spoken with someone who either possessed infinite confidence, or absolutely no idea what she'd gotten herself into, possibly both. As the tournament's opening ceremony approached, Arena 7 remained the subject of intense speculation and growing nervousness among the organization staff. The mysterious human competitor had established herself as the tournament's wildcard, an unknown quantity in a competition that had prided itself on predictability for 3 millennia. The administrator found herself checking the arena's status reports with increasing frequency, half expecting the whole situation to resolve itself through the competitor's failure to appear. Instead, all systems remained green. The atmospheric mixture stayed stable, and that simple flag with its red, white, and blue design continued hanging from the ceremonial mount like a promise or a threat. The opening ceremony had proceeded with its traditional blend of pageantry and barely contained bloodlust. Each species champion making their ritual entrance to thunderous approval from their respective fan bases. The Vorthak champion's appearance alone had required emergency structural reinforcement of the arena floor, while the Xenari warriors' demonstration of their natural weaponry had left permanent scars in the ceremonial platform that would probably become tourist attraction. Then came Arena 7's moment, and the galaxy collectively held its breath to see what manner of evolutionary nightmare humanity had produced. What emerged was disappointingly ordinary by galactic standards. No massive frame that suggested adaptation to crushing gravity, no visible natural weapons, no redundant limbs or specialized combat organs. Just a bipedal figure in what appeared to be improvised protective gear, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd either transcended fear or never properly understood it to begin with. The crowd's initial reaction ranged from confused murmuring to outright laughter. Several bookmakers immediately adjusted their odds, pushing the human's chances of surviving the first round into mathematical territories that bordered on theoretical impossibility. The preliminary matches began with their traditional efficiency. The Vorthak champion demonstrated why bone density mattered by treating their opponent like a particularly stubborn piece of construction material that needed reshaping. The Xenari warrior's victory was achieved through a combination of speed, precision, and what could generously be described as artistic dismemberment. The Threxian approach involved psychological warfare followed by the kind of physical violence that required content warnings in 17 different languages. Each victory followed established patterns that the tournament's predictive algorithms had mapped over centuries. Specialized evolutionary advantages met and overcame other specialized evolutionary advantages in ways that were spectacular, brutal, and entirely expected.
Then the human stepped into the combat zone for her first match. Her opponent, a Cytherian whose species had evolved crystalline skin that could deflect energy weapons and bone structure dense enough to survive planetary bombardment, approached the encounter with the casual confidence of someone about to step on an annoying insect. The match should have lasted approximately 4 seconds, just long enough for the human to realize her mistake before being reduced to component atoms. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The human didn't fight like someone who'd evolved for combat. She fought like someone who'd evolved for problem solving and had decided to apply those skills to the immediate problem of not dying. She didn't try to match the Cytherian's strength or attempt to penetrate that crystalline armor through conventional means. Instead, she did something that 3,000 years of tournament history had never recorded. She changed the nature of the fight entirely, using her opponent's mass and momentum against them, employing the arena's environmental features as weapons, and demonstrating an approach to combat that seemed to view the established rules as suggestions rather than limitations. The Cytherian found themselves in the uniquely humiliating position of being defeated by an opponent who shouldn't have been able to harm them, using techniques that didn't appear in any combat manual, through methods that were simultaneously completely legal and utterly unsporting. The crowd's stunned silence was broken only by the sound of betting terminals crashing as their probability calculations entered recursive loops, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. The second round produced similar results against a Vexuri champion whose species had perfected the art of biological warfare through natural toxin production. The human approached this match with the systematic methodology of someone conducting a scientific experiment, testing her opponent's capabilities while avoiding their primary advantages, through what could only be described as aggressive lateral thinking. By the time the Vexuri realized their opponent was immune to their species' primary weapon, apparently humans had evolved resistance to a remarkable variety of naturally occurring toxins. They found themselves trapped in a combat scenario that bore no resemblance to anything in their ancestral memory. The tournament organizers found themselves dealing with a situation that their carefully structured competition had never anticipated. A competitor who was winning through methods that weren't technically cheating but felt morally questionable anyway. The human fought with a combination of creativity, adaptability, and what appeared to be a complete disregard for the established conventions of honorable combat. She's treating each match like a puzzle to be solved rather than a battle to be won, observed the head combat analyst, a Nexarian whose species had evolved specifically to understand conflict dynamics. Her approach is completely unprecedented in tournament history. The third round provided the galaxy with an even more disturbing revelation, when the human faced a draconian warrior, whose species had evolved perfect predatory instincts over millions of years. The match began with the draconian employing their traditional hunting patterns, using speed and precision strikes to wear down their opponent before delivering the killing blow. What they discovered was that humans had apparently evolved their own predatory instincts, along with something the draconian had never encountered: endurance hunting capabilities that bordered on supernatural persistence. The human didn't try to match her opponent's burst speed or precision. Instead, she simply refused to stop, maintaining pressure with a relentlessness that gradually transformed the draconian's confidence into something approaching panic. By the match's end, the draconian found themselves in the unprecedented position of being psychologically defeated by a species they'd initially dismissed as primitive prey animal. The human's victory speech, delivered to a stadium full of stunned spectators, consisted of a polite thank you and a casual observation that her opponent had fought well but seemed tired. The betting pools had given up entirely. Several major bookmaking operations had declared bankruptcy rather than attempt to calculate odds for the semi-final matches. The tournament's predictive algorithms had been quietly retired after producing results that suggested the human's probability of victory was simultaneously zero and inevitable. The other remaining competitors had begun studying footage of the human's matches with the desperate intensity of scholars trying to decode an alien language. What they found was deeply disturbing: a fighting style that seemed to adapt in real time to whatever advantages their opponents possessed, turning specialized evolutionary traits into weaknesses through methods that shouldn't have been possible. The semi-final round loomed ahead, promising to answer the question that had begun haunting the galactic combat community: exactly what kind of species had they inadvertently invited to their most prestigious tournament, and why did every victory make the human seem more dangerous rather than less? The championship match represented everything the Nexus Combat Championships had been designed to showcase: the ultimate meeting between two apex predators, each representing millions of years of evolutionary refinement for the singular purpose of killing things efficiently. On one side stood the apex Threnody champion, whose species had evolved on a world where everything was either predator or prey, and the distinction usually lasted about 30 seconds. The Threnody possessed every advantage that galactic combat theory considered decisive. They stood 12 feet tall, with bone density that made neutronium look fragile, redundant cardiovascular systems that could sustain combat effectiveness even with massive trauma, and reflexes so fast they could catch laser beams if they were feeling particularly ambitious. Their natural weaponry included retractable claws that could slice through starship armor, and their species had never lost a championship match in tournament history. Facing this evolutionary masterpiece was a human who had somehow convinced an entire galaxy that she might actually win. The pre-match analysis had driven the tournament's experts into nervous breakdowns trying to calculate how the human could possibly compete against an opponent who represented the theoretical pinnacle of combat evolution. Every conventional metric suggested the match should end with the Threnody achieving victory before the human had time to realize the fight had started. The human herself seemed remarkably unconcerned about these statistical inevitabilities. Her pre-match preparation consisted of checking her improvised equipment, reviewing what appeared to be maintenance manuals, and engaging in what could only be described as casual stretching exercises. When asked about her strategy for facing the galaxy's most dangerous predator, she'd simply smiled and mentioned something about having dealt with worse. The match began with the Threnody employing their species' traditional opening gambit, a demonstration of overwhelming force designed to break their opponent's psychological resistance before the real violence began. They moved with fluid grace that somehow managed to be both beautiful and absolutely terrifying, their every motion optimized by millions of years of evolution for maximum lethality. The human's response was to do something that no opponent in Threnody history had ever attempted. She ignored the intimidation entirely and began what appeared to be a systematic analysis of her opponent's combat capability. Instead of retreating or attempting to match the Threnodies' display of dominance, she studied them with the clinical detachment of a mechanic examining a particularly interesting engine problem. What followed was a masterclass in applied human stubbornness disguised as combat strategy. The human didn't try to outfight the Threnody, she outlasted them, outthought them, and gradually convinced them that the match they'd expected to win was actually a completely different fight entirely. The Threnody found themselves facing an opponent who treated their evolutionary advantages as interesting variables in an equation, rather than insurmountable obstacles. When they demonstrated their incredible speed, the human adapted her time. When they showcased their natural weapons, she altered her positioning. When they attempted to use their superior strength, she simply wasn't there to receive it. More unsettling was the human's apparent immunity to the psychological aspects of combat that had served the Threnody so well against other species. She showed no fear of their intimidating presence, no hesitation in the face of their natural weaponry, and no recognition that she was supposed to be helplessly outclassed. Instead, she fought with the calm persistence of someone fixing a particularly stubborn mechanical problem. The turning point came when the human did something that violated every principle of galactic combat theory. She began talking to her opponent. Not trash talk or psychological warfare, but casual conversation about the Threnodies' fighting techniques, offering observations about their form and suggestions for improvement with the helpful tone of someone providing technical advice. The Threnody, who had evolved perfect predatory instincts, found themselves psychologically disarmed by an opponent who was treating their deathmatch like a collaborative learning experience. Their ancestral programming, refined over millions of years to recognize fear, aggression, or submission in their opponents, simply had no framework for processing friendly, constructive criticism delivered mid-combat. By the time the match reached its conclusion, the Threnody champion had been systematically worn down by an opponent who had somehow turned their greatest strengths into sources of confusion and frustration. The human's victory came not through superior force or speed, but through the simple application of persistence, adaptability, and what could only be described as weaponized reasonable. The post-victory interviews revealed the galaxy's first glimpse into humanity's actual nature, and the results were deeply disturbing for anyone who'd been hoping for reassuring explanation. When asked about her combat training, the human mentioned something called military history, and began describing concepts that made the tournament organizers wish they'd never asked. Total war, she explained cheerfully, was humanity's traditional approach to serious conflict. This apparently involved the complete mobilization of entire civilizations, for the purpose of making their enemies cease to exist as organized entities. She mentioned this with the casual tone of someone discussing weather patterns, seemingly unaware that her audience was developing collective nightmares. The discussion of human military philosophy continued with references to strategic bombing, economic warfare, psychological operations, and something called mutually assured destruction, that had kept her species from eliminating itself primarily through the threat of eliminating itself. She described these concepts with academic detachment, as if recounting ancient history rather than her species' current operational doctrines. The galactic community's growing horror reached its peak when someone asked about the mysterious registration that had started this whole situation. The human's response was delivered with a smile that somehow managed to be both friendly and absolutely terrifying. "Oh, that wasn't mysterious at all," she said. "We've been planning to join galactic civilization for quite some time now. We just wanted to make sure we understood the local customs before making formal contact." The implications sank in with the devastating impact of a neutron star collision. The flag had been flying in Arena 7 because humanity had been systematically infiltrating galactic systems for months, learning their procedures, understanding their weaknesses, and preparing for eventual integration. The tournament hadn't been gate-crashed by a lost pilot. It had been reconnaissance by a species that treated first contact like a military operation. The championship trophy presentation was held in an atmosphere of stunned silence, broken only by the sound of emergency diplomatic communications being transmitted across the galaxy. The human accepted her prize with gracious humility, thanked everyone for their hospitality, and mentioned that she looked forward to humanity's continued participation in galactic civilization. As she walked away with her trophy and prize money, that simple flag with its red, white, and blue stripes continued hanging in Arena 7, no longer a mystery but a promise. The galaxy had invited humanity to compete, and they'd discovered that humans didn't just participate, they prepared, they adapted, and they won. The tournament's new regulations, hastily drafted in the aftermath, included a previously unnecessary clause about requiring advance notice of any species' intention to join galactic civilization. It was a precaution that everyone privately suspected would prove entirely inadequate. After all, the flag had been flying before anyone knew the competitor existed, and if humanity could do that once, what else might they already have planned?